So you've been working hard installing your cabinets from IKEA or wherever you got them. Everything's looking pretty nice, but now it comes time to put the kicks in and you're noticing that there's big humps in the floor. So I'm going to show you exactly how to fit your kicks so they look perfect along the floor. What you're going to need is a couple of shims and a little block. You want to get a block that is slightly thicker, maybe like a 32nd, half a 16th thicker than the bottom shelf of your cabinet. So then what I recommend is to cut your kicks to length so that they're ready to go. And what you're going to want to do is, if you're fitting in between two tight spaces, you can cut your kick slightly longer, like a 32nd, 64th long, and then you could just bevel this back edge a little bit so that it's just going to snug right in there and fit super tight on the overall length. So what you're going to want to do to fit that perfectly to the floor is scribe it. So take the shims and just shim that right to the bottom of the shelf in the cabinet. So just use your finger to make sure that it's perfectly level there. If you're a little too high, bring it down a bit. If you're perfectly level, take your block, take a pencil. I like number B pencils. They mark a little bit better on this pre-finished material. So take a pencil and just follow along the contour of the floor. Now the reason why you want the blocks slightly bigger is you want to just give yourself a little bit of leeway. You can still push the kick down tight, and there will be like a 64th gap on the top that you're never going to see. Yeah, you just don't want to end up trying to force the kick in there, because what can happen is it can chip the bottom off. So now that you have a perfect scribe mark all the way along, you can go ahead and cut that. There's a couple ways you can do it. You could use a skill saw, tape this off, and then cut it on the face with the skill saw. If it's fairly parallel, you could use a table saw with a fence, or if you're pretty good with the table saw, you could freehand rip it pretty accurately. I don't recommend cutting the right to the line. I like to leave a little bit of the line showing, and then I finish it off with either a belt sander, or I have a grinder, or you could even use an orbital sander with some 60 grit sandpaper on there. So now I've got that all perfectly sanded down. You can do a little test fit and see that it is fitting perfectly. There's no gaps. Just editing the video right now, and I thought it'd be important to mention that whenever you sand the bottom of a kick, you're left with a bit of a jagged edge that will chip off easily when you're pushing it in. So you need to take a sanding block or some sanding paper and just break the edge with a couple of passes, smooth it over, and then that way you're going to save yourself a lot of agony when it comes to the install. Back to the video. So, and now what you want to do when you're putting the kick in is the end that you ended up beveling, that's going to kind of pressure fit the whole thing together, you want to put that in last. So start with the other side. That clips on, and then you can see this other side is just and there you go. That pressure fit was maybe slightly more pressure than you would have wanted, but it's fitting very nice and tight. And hey, if you're having any troubles with the doors at your house, I got the perfect playlist for you right here. We'll see you over there. What am I trying to say? And that's just gonna kind of
one of our most successful videos on how to construct a metal stud partition, a number of enquiries have come in the fact that how do we form an external corner and how would we build a door opening? And that's what I'm going to demonstrate today. To build a partition, we're going to need a U-track and a C-stud. These are available in various lengths and widths. So I've marked on the floor where my U-track needs to fit. I now need to set where the door opening is actually going to be. The opening itself, it's worth double checking on the door lining that is going to be fitted the size before you transfer that onto your lines on the floor. So this is where my door opening is actually going to be. You can now cut the U-track and we'll then fix this to the floor. You can now see how it's going to form the external corner. There are a couple of things that we need to do. Our plasterboard has got to slide through, so we can either leave a 15mm gap for a 12.5mm board, so our plasterboard will slide through with ease, or we can take it off the inside leg and leave the outside one in place. That acts as a nice stop for when our plasterboard runs through. We're now ready to fix our U-track to the floor using the Cineat 13mm wafer head screw. At the door opening, we need 2 wafer head screws. And 150mm back, 2 more. On domestic housing, the 2 screws at the door opening are all that is required. By putting the 2 screws 150mm back, that will allow for heavier weights indoors, up to 75 kilograms. I'm now going to do the same on the other side of the door opening. I've now fixed my head track. You will notice that it's continuous. It doesn't have an opening. I now need to fix my plasterboard before I can form the external corner. If you notice, I have forgotten to leave the 15mm gap for the 12.5mm plasterboard, so it won't slide through. Not to worry, we can actually cut that in situ and fold the tab in. So if you do make a mistake and you forget to leave the gap, you can cut it in situ. Now I've corrected that, I can slide my board through and I can now fit. That is my board now fixed. Now cut my C-stud to length. I can place this in position. With my stud now in position, forming part of the external corner, I now need to secure at 600 centres. So that's my C-stud firmly fixed to form the external corner. That's all my C-studs now cut and in position. This C-stud is going to form part of the door opening. We need the addition of timber to take the door lining. Now the timber can either sit inside the C-stud or on the face of the C-stud. I'm going to demonstrate both methods. I now have my timber, which is ready to fix inside of my C-stud. The C-stud's not been securely fixed into position yet until my timber's in place. The reason for that is, as you can see, this will slide into the C-stud. Sometimes it won't, and an alternative method would be to take out the stud and slide into place. I now need to secure the timber in place using a Cineat high thread screw at 600 centres. I'm now going to secure my C-stud in position using a 13mm wafer head screw. I'm now going to plumb and fix the stud at the head. With my stud now plumb, I can secure. I'm now going to show you the alternative method. I'm now going to put the timber on the face of the stud. To do this, we place our timber against the stud, and the timber should also be sat inside the track. We're now going to secure the timber in place using the high thread screw at 600 centres. So my timber's nice and flush. I can now secure the stud in place. And now plumb. Now that I'm plumb, I'm now going to fix the stud at the head. So, with my 2 door opening studs securely fixed, I can now form the door head. To form the door head, we use a piece of U-track. The first thing we do is we must cut a leg of not less than 150 millimeters. It can be more, but never less. We then need to add on the door opening. What we want to do is just double check before we cut. Then we need a further 150 millimeters. With those cut, all we simply do is fold down the edges. We can now fix the head at the correct height. We do that, we need to check the door lining. With the leg in position and at the correct height, I can now secure by using 2 wafer head screws. Then we repeat this on the opposite side. I can now set the opposite side. That's my final stud in place. That maintains my stud centres at 600 millimeters for 1200 wide board and 450 if it's a 900 wide board. To create a different type of opening, such as a serving hatch, there are a couple of differences. We still have our uprights, we have our head track, but you'll notice at the bottom our floor track is continuous all the way through. And we also have another piece of U-track, and this is flipped in the opposite direction and will be fixed at the height to form our rectangular opening. By doing this, we can continue our studs at 600 centres for 1200 millimeter plasterboards and 450 centres for 900 millimeter plasterboards. I've fixed my internal board. I'm now going to put my plasterboard on the outside of the partition reinforcing our external corner. Top tip, it will pay to draw a centre line at 600. This way you know where your stud is behind. Where the stud is, the centre of the stud is for the door lining, I've also marked. Again, I can then put my screws in at the 300 centres. I know where the stud is. So I can now place my end stud. What I need to do is line up the centre line of the stud with the edge of the board. This is so we can continue with our next board. It may seem wasteful, but we can now cut the head and we can use the edge of the door liner to remove this board. The reason for that is we reduce the risk of cracking by taking the board into the opening as opposed to running up the side of the door edge. I can now use my cutting knife to run down the back of the board. So we've cut, we can now snap. And remove. So as you can see, we've now started to form the door opening. Boarding finished, we're now ready to install the door lining. It's important to keep the lining flush with the edge of the plasterboard. With it positioned correctly, we can now fix. So, we've shown you how to form an external corner. We've also shown you how to form a door opening. Happy building.
Hey guys, welcome to today's video. I am ecstatic to be building this one because it's for a friend who has an adventurous pup and she wants to keep her pup in the same place at night. So I thought it'd be really cool to combine my dog bowl stand with a dog bed to create this really cool dog studio apartment. I don't think anyone else has done this, so I'm excited to build it and I can't wait to see how it turns out. So let's get started. We'll start off by cutting all of our pieces for the base on my table saw. I'm using a 3/4 inch maple plywood for this project with red oak for the ledge holding the actual dog bed. I love these woods together, but you can choose to do this entire project in plywood. I'll have a diagram to my blog of all the cuts linked below. Next, we'll glue the end of the bottom piece, then drill pilot holes into one of the side pieces to make screwing in the screws super easy. For each piece, I'll glue the ends, drill pilot holes, countersink with a basic 3/8 inch bit, and then join the pieces with screws. When I can, I'll add clamps to close any gaps in my joints. Pro tip though, take a chisel and clean up any glue that may squeeze out before it fully dries to prevent having to sand the plywood past the top layer. Here, I decided to just glue and clamp these sides together to make it easier to screw in without any unwanted movements. So now I need to go in with my drill to do pilot holes, countersink, and say it again, screw it all together. It's time to work on the inside and front of the tower. This half wall glued in first, then screwed in place. I then flipped the bed on its side in order to clamp the half wall down. Once the half wall was done, I glued and screwed in the top piece. Now this was the worst part for one person. I couldn't figure out a way to hold the ledge for the dog bowls in place until I just decided to do acrobatics. I eventually decided to hold the ledge in place with one hand, then screw the ledge into the half wall. Once all of that was done, it was pretty easy just to screw the ledge into the side piece. By the way, this mud dauber has been getting on my nerves this entire time, flying around in my garage like he belongs here. Things are looking really good now. It's time to glue the drawer together so we can store all the dog treats the pup will need. This process is pretty easy as long as you cut the sides exactly the same, so I usually set up my fence on my table saw to do repeat cuts. Remember, glue is your best friend, but don't get crazy. Also, one of the biggest lifesavers in this project has been this clamp. You have to get one because it makes my life so much easier, because I put pressure on all four corners at the same time for a beautifully joined box. And who doesn't want a beautifully joined box? Now you're gonna have to get the face of the drawer so you can glue it on. I simply aligned my face to the bottom of my drawer and then marked where center would be for that piece. Finally, it is time to do the ledge for the dog bed. I'm using 4-inch red oak for this. There are 3 sides I need to cut. One of the sides will have an opening for the dog to get in and out of the bed for easy access. I marked how wide I wanted to have the opening plus how deep it should be. I didn't use screws for these pieces. I just glued and clamped them tightly to the bottom piece because wood glue is really strong and can sometimes be stronger than screws. You just have to do it right. We're so close now. I put glue into the holes and inserted 3/8 inch dowels. I cut off the excess of these dowels once the glue was dry with my flush pull saw. And for me, this is like super awesome just because it's super easy and just a nice little fun thing to do, I guess. I have this red oak. It's a 4x4 piece for the legs of the bed. I cut them to 3.5 inches with a 15-degree angle on both sides. And I also added a straight leg for extra support. I actually did a terrible job of capturing this process, but I just connected the legs with a dowel in each leg, gluing it into the hole of the bottom of the dog bed. This is a totally optional feature I added to the dog bed to make it feel like a little apartment. I simply glued dowels to the bottom and side of the dog bed and added a hole for the curtain rod to run through. I also grabbed some kitchen curtains to add to this project. To make this look more sophisticated and modern and actually like it's finished, I went to Lowe's and I grabbed some drawer pulls. I grabbed multiple, but I really love this one and it works for the piece really well. So I grabbed that for Lowe's just to add a bit of contrast to the dog bed, because everything's light and adding a little bit of darkness is really cute. And to finish this project, I did a final coat of clear polyurethane. And it's finished. Cue the montage. And that's it. That is the project. It took me about 3 months, which was kind of long, but I really enjoyed the process. I really wanted to focus on how do I build this the best way possible, and I felt like I did that with the time that I took. So thank you guys for watching this video. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos about DIYs, home renovations, and upgrades, then go ahead and subscribe to my channel to get updates and click the notification bell so you know exactly when I post my next video. Thanks guys, bye.
Patricia and I decided that we were going to spend an hour or two this afternoon working on some priming, and so this is just a glimpse of what she's up to. So she's working on finishing off the hallway walls here, filling up the paint roller again, and finish the
Is this
ceiling.
as boring as watching paint dry?
No, this is a little bit less boring, but I won't do much of it. So as you can see, she puts the first coat on and then starts to spread it out on the stuff that she's already put a first coat on. So you end up with layering kind of effect. And it dries fairly quickly, so you'll actually end up with pretty good coverage, even coverage all the way along.
Probably 1.5, and it's better to use more paint with the primer than with your good coat because it costs less money. So if you do a good priming job, you get a good base for your good paint.
As you see, it goes fairly quickly. I think that's probably enough to show you what we're doing. And then what I was working on was the ceiling in the storage room here. So I finished the ceiling and then I'm starting on the wall back here. You can see that it's fairly even coverage, even though the wall is not as good, well covered as the ceiling was. So I have to go over that little section that I did there. And then the rest of the room. But we're going to very quickly run out of paint here, or primer, so I don't think that we're going to get very far. I'm almost empty in my tray. So we'll bring you up to date probably tomorrow.
This just to prove that he can paint too, and he's helping out.
What was that?
I'm just proving that you can paint.
Do I like to do it? There's another question.
I like to do it You are doing it because you want to get into this house.
Exactly. So, what's the job like? What's the evaluation?
It's looking good. Well, while I'm gone, you can cut into the there, unless you want to leave that for me.
I'll leave that for you.
Okay. Okay.
At least that's what I'll claim.
Then you can water the
Yeah.
plants.
So I've done as much as I'm going to be doing. So what I did was finish up the ceiling in the storage room and the top half of the room. So I had a very long pole that I was working with. Trish will get the rest for the shorter pole. And then I started on the ceiling in the studio. Got about half time or so. And Patricia's finishing up in the hallway. So that's the last section that you've got. Just the piece in front of the office door, or between the office door and the laundry room. Got to hurry up because I hear Mr. Strongbow and Mr. Guinness calling.
Well, why don't you meet Mr. Strongbow and Mr. Guinness, and I will clean up here.
Well, you still have a bit on your tray, don't you?
Yeah, but I'll just cover it up.
Oh, okay. You don't want to finish it off? Because I can help you finish it off too.
No, it's okay.
No? Yeah? All right, so we're out of here. I'll come back later then and close up the door. Right, we'll update you later.
Today I thought we'd take a look at laying some reclaimed parquet floors. The reason I'm doing this video is because everywhere on forums it tells that if you're laying parquet floor and it has tar on the back, that you have to take that tar off. That's actually not the case. It's just making you a whole ton of work. The thing about the internet is you get one person say something and then another person, and then it becomes the standard. Every single forum I've looked on says you've got to take the tar off the back, you can't lay without taking the tar off the back. Well, I'll show you today. I've laid many reclaimed floors and I'll show you how I'm doing this one. These are oak parquets and they've all got tar on the back. I'm not taking the tar off. What I'm doing is I'm cleaning the sides. You can have a quick look at the side there. You can see there's gunk on the sides. I've got to clean that off on the ends with a knife, just so that all the blocks are the same size, because it'll be a nightmare to lay if the blocks are not the same size. And they've all been laid a while and they've got a bit of dirt in between them, so I've got to clean that off. Once I've cleaned that off, I'm going to take a block and give it a bit of a scrape on this, just the bottom, on a breeze block, just to take any loose tar off. That one's fine. I'll show you the one I've done, to be honest. Let's have a look. There we go. This one I've done, it's got clean sides and the bottom's, there's no bits dropping off the bottom. That's all I'm doing with the blocks. I'm prepping the blocks now and sticking them in a little pile there. This is what I've done so far. So you can see that, and the glue I'm using is Lelcol 5500. This is a solvent-based adhesive. The reason I'm using that is because tar, the solvent will melt the tar, and that then keys into the tar, so you get a good bond on the tar. And also, you can see I'm sticking to quarry tiles, so they're a non-absorbent hard surface. Two of what most people think are the most difficult things to fix parquet down to. I'll show you this whole job and you can see what it's like in the end. But this has been 24 hours down, and you can walk on that now just fine. Just thought I'd post this because you can save yourself tons of work. If you have to plane this off, I mean, I wouldn't recommend putting that through a planer. It'll absolutely knacker the blades on your planer. So I wouldn't recommend. I have cut them off before when we require a thinner parky, wood parky, where you can have an old top on a say a 1/2 inch, and I've cut the bottom off because you're not actually cutting through the tar, and I would use an old blade. But I would never put that through a planer, not unless you really hate the planer. That's a horrible thing to do. So just so you know, you can stick them down. Trust me, you can stick them down with the tar on the back, and you might save yourself a whole ton of work.
In my shop tour video, I mentioned that I don't have a jointer. So then I got a ton of requests to make a video to show how I mill rough lumber without one. So here it is. When you buy rough lumber like this, there are no straight or square edges. The board might also be twisted, cupped, or bowed, not good for building. And just like there are 4 sides to a board, the milling process is going to be done in 4 steps. So the first step in the milling process, after rough cutting to length, is to make one face of the board flat. The ideal tool to do this is a jointer, but we could get around not having the right tools with just using a few simple jigs. For this first step, I used a super simple jointer jig at the planer. And you might be wondering, if I have a planer, why can't I just send the board through it just like this? That's because a planer simply makes one face parallel to another face. So if you have a board that has a twist in it and you send it through the planer, the cutters are going to follow whatever is on the bottom of the board. So your board is going to come out smooth on top, but it will still have a twist in it. Same thing for a cup or a bow. This happens because inside the planer there are these rollers that put so much pressure on the wood to help feed the wood through. And since there's so much pressure, it flattens out the boards if there's a cup or a twist or a bow as it's cutting the top, but when it comes back out the other side, it's going to spring back to shape and it's going to have that same twist that it had when you sent it in. So that's where this jointer jig comes in handy, and it cannot be any simpler. It's just a piece of scrap that's attached to a long, flat piece of MDF. I got this idea from Colin at Woodwork Web, so I'm going to link down to his video below. He has a ton of information on this. So here's how it works. You take the board that you want flattening, and you find all of the high spots. You could do that by seeing that the board is rocking back and forth. You could clearly see a visible gap there. Just take a shim and put it underneath it. And now when you try to rock it, it's no longer rocking and it's stable. So this board just has a twist in it, but it would be different for something that has a cup or a bow. Like a board like this, you could see over here, this board is cupped as well. So I like to leave these like thin little scraps around here, and I just would put them underneath in the middle and get the appropriate thickness for the piece of wood that I'm using, so that way it won't flatten out as the rollers are pushing it through. The same thing for a bow, you would do it in that direction. But for now, I'll just use this board. Make sure that it's not rocking. And this one only needs one shim, but normally when I'm doing this on like longer boards or rougher boards, there's like a lot of shims in different locations. And to secure it in place, I'll just put a dab of hot glue on either side of it and then press it down. This way, the hot glue is securing the shim to the board, and it's also securing the board to the shim. Because this board doesn't have so many shims, I'll just add some hot glue to these edges just to keep it a little bit more secure. Now the piece is secure, and the cutter heads are going to cut the top of this board parallel to this flat MDF piece instead of the twisted bottom of this board. But before sending it through the planer, I just want to talk about grain direction for a second. If you look at the side of the board here, you can see that the grain is running one way or the other. So this is the direction that I want to feed my workpiece into the machine, because it will cause less tear out because it's going with the grain. If I would try to send it through going this way, the cutter heads would then be going against the grain, causing tear out. This might be hard on pieces where grain is running in all different directions, like this board over here. Just try to find the direction that most of the grain is going. To set the cutter head, I raise it well above the workpiece and put the whole thing into the planer. Then I lower the cutter head until I see that the indicator has hit some material. Then I do 2 full turns backwards to raise the cutter head. I pull the jig and the workpiece out. Then I go back those full 2 rotations to get back to that depth. And then just to be safe from any high points, I'll roll it back a quarter turn. I don't do this every time that I use the planer because I think it's easy to see the difference between the rough wood and the freshly cut wood, but for video's sake, I'll just scribble some marks onto the wood here so you can see the progress of how it gets cleaned up. Now it's ready to go through. You can see that the planer has started to clean up all the high points, and I'll just continue to lower the cutter head with every pass until I see all those scribble lines disappear. So now the top of this board is parallel with this MDF board. And just a note, if you don't have a planer and you have a router, you can do basically the same thing with a router sled. You just shim the board until it stops rocking, and then you use the router to flatten the top face. Let's test to see how flat this board is. Easily comes up off of the hot glue. If any of it gets stuck on the MDF, you just chisel it right off. Now flip it over onto that freshly plain side. All right, no more rocking. Awesome. I've just done exactly what a jointer would do without using a jointer. So the next step in the milling process, if you have all the right tools, would actually be to use a planer. So you take the freshly jointed face and you put that on the bed of the planer, and then the second face becomes parallel to that first face. So there's going to be nothing different in this step if you have a planer. So all you need to do is send the board through using that freshly flattened surface on the bed. The cutter heads are going to make this second face parallel to the first one, just as a planer is supposed to do. And boom, I have a board that used to be all twisted and wonky, and now there are two faces that are parallel to each other. One thing to note here is that my jointer jig is 48 inches long. And this has been working for me because I usually rough cut to length before I start this milling process. One time I needed a super long one, so I have actually this super long one here that I only used once for a specific project, but this has been working for me, so just make yours the same size as the typical projects that you work with. Before moving on to step 3 of the milling process, just a quick break to talk about this week's sponsor, Policy Genius. So tools like planers and jointers help you turn rough lumber into square stock. Without them, you'll either need to spend extra money at the lumberyard buying surface lumber, or spend hours upon hours with a hand plane making them flat and square. No offense to anybody who enjoys doing that, but I personally like to take advantage of modern tools that save me both time and money. Which brings me to this week's sponsor, Policy Genius, another tool to help you save time and money. So how can it do that? Policy Genius compares America's top home and auto insurance companies so you can find the right plan to fit your needs. Even if you already have insurance, it might be worth it just to take a few quick moments out of your day to see if you have the right plan for you. Because Policy Genius has saved its home and auto insurance customers an average of about $1,000 a year. All you have to do is answer a few quick questions about yourself and your property, and Policy Genius will compare your current policy with some others to make sure you're getting the best coverage at the rate that works for you. Besides for home and auto insurance, Policy Genius also offers tools to get you set up with life insurance that fits your needs as well. So if the experts at Policy Genius find you a better deal than you currently have, the best part is that they will do all the work to get you switched for free. So I think that that's a pretty cool tool to help you save both time and money. So head on over to policygenius.com/3x3custom to shop the market and compare quotes. All right, on to step 3 now. The board now has two faces that are flat and parallel to each other. The next step would be to make one of the edges square to those faces. Right now, this is not even close to square. You can see a big gap in there. This maybe is easier this way. There we go. All right. So the right tool to do this would be to use a jointer on the edge like this. Pretend for a second that this is a jointer. Like here would be the blade. So if you have the face that was already flat, like against a fence on the back and then you run it along the jointer, the blades over here are going to cut this edge square to the face that's against the fence on the jointer. So there are a few ways to do this without having a jointer, but you might be wondering why you can't just rip the board like this through the table saw and that will create straight edges. Well, it's because the boards that you get rough at the lumber yard, they don't have straight edges. So you see the straight edge is rocking back and forth. So if you would just run that along the fence in your table saw, the cut that the blade is going to make is going to follow that curve. So you're not going to create straight cuts unless you have a straight reference against the fence. One of the ways that I like to do this is with a tapering jig because it has a straight edge that gets referenced along the fence as you make a cut. Or if it has a miter bar in it, it just slides in the miter slot, always creating one square edge. So this is one of the most common questions that I get. How do you know where to align your board onto the tapering jig in order to make that square cut since there's no square references on the board? So the answer to that is that it doesn't matter at all where you put the board. You can set it up so that it cuts this board into like some weird shape, and this step is only making one edge square to the two faces. You're not making the whole board square just yet. That's going to happen in step 4. So this board is a great example to show this to you guys because of this weird corner over here that needs to be cut away. So I'm going to put this onto the tapering jig just along where that like wonky edge is, and it's going to make like a cut into this board where the result is going to be a really weird not square shape. So what I'm looking for here is just an even amount of overhang along the edge. Has nothing to do with the squareness on either side of the board. I'm just cutting off all the bad parts that I don't want. Then I could lock the fence into place and then use the clamps to lock the board to the jig. And now I just need to cut off that edge. And just like that, this board has one square edge, but you can see that it's like a weird shape. So the squareness of the whole board doesn't matter at this point. This tapering jig is 30 inches long, so it works for most of the applications that I need it to, but sometimes I need to joint a longer piece, and there's an even simpler way to do this. So this piece of walnut is longer than the jig, so it wouldn't be safe to use this to joint that edge. So what I would do is just take a scrap piece of some plywood, and I'll use that as the reference against the fence. And I'll just use some double-sided tape to temporarily put that board onto that scrap. Sometimes I'll use hot glue. Also, just depends what kind of mood I'm in. And once again, this board doesn't have to be straight or square to anything. When you're lining it up, you just want to make sure that all the parts that you want to be cut off are hanging off the edge. Then same as before, just run it through the table saw, and this cut is referencing off of that straight edge from the plywood. Now that rough edge is all cut away, you could just take this off of the plywood and you have a freshly squared up edge. And sometimes it might be hard to keep track of all this stuff, so I'll just make like a check or some sort of marker symbol so that I know that this is the freshly jointed squared edge. Sometimes if the piece is really long, I use my track saw. So this would just run along the edge here, making one edge square to this top face. This would be the same thing as just using a circular saw with an edge guide. And that's actually the way that I used to do it before I got this. You can also use a router table as a jointer. I actually posted a video a really long time ago on how to do this. But basically, just imagine that the router table is like a jointer flipped on its edge. So the fence over here is actually like the bed of the jointer, and you would set the outfeed fence, like offset it a little bit just to make room for the amount that you're cutting off. So it's actually a really cool process, and I'll add the link down below if you're interested in learning more. Another great way to get around not having a jointer is to just use a straight edge and a pattern bit in your router. So if you take a known straight edge, like something man-made like plywood or MDF, and you double side tape that to a workpiece, overhanging just slightly, then the bearing on this bit is going to ride along this straight edge, creating one straight edge on your board. On to the last step here. So the board has two faces that are flat and parallel to each other, and it has one edge that is square to both of those faces. And now the last step in the process is to make that opposite edge square to the faces and also parallel to that opposite edge. Because if you look at the board here, at the bottom, it's about 4 inches wide, and at the top, it's about 3 inches wide because of that angled cut we did with the tapering jig. Normally that difference isn't so drastic. I just wanted to show you how in that third step where you're just squaring up that first edge, it doesn't matter if it's a straight cut at all, either at the router table as a jointer or using the pattern bit or any of the other methods where you're using a straight edge against the fence. The square edge that was cut in the third step is now going to be against the fence. So the cut that I'm doing now is going to do two things. It's going to make this edge parallel to the edge that's against the fence, and it's also going to make it square to the faces because the blade is at 90 degrees. Boom. Square, stock. So that's basically how you get rough lumber into square, usable stock, and now it's ready to be used. Well, sort of. So everything that I just did, I milled it slightly oversized. So like maybe like an 1/8 or a 1/16, really not important exactly how much, just slightly oversized. And the reason for that is because of moisture content. So there's a ton of moisture still in this wood, and as you remove layers, you're exposing the inner core of the wood, which probably has more moisture than the outside. So as that outside is going to dry off, it might then kink or twist or bow or cup or something like that as you're using it. So in order to prevent that, after doing this whole process that I just showed you, I then bring it inside my house and I stack and sticker it overnight or for a few days so that that top layer that I just milled dries out. And then if it does move on me, then I could just mill off that tiny little bit and get it to its final dimension, and then it's ready to be used. So I hope this was helpful for all you guys who don't have jointers. I think it's really cool that even if you don't have the right tools, there's always a jig or a workaround to get the same results. While I hope to get a jointer one day, and I think it's going to make my life just a little bit easier, I think that these are great alternatives if you don't have those tools. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to Policy Genius for sponsoring this video, and I'll see you on the next one. I think I have to sneeze. This straight edge is rocking. Who's calling me?